Bonjour à toutes et tous.
Good morning to all of you.
Nos travaux.
We are now going to open our conference. I would just like to say a few welcoming remarks before we start. And so on behalf of AFD, I would like to say how glad I am to be welcoming you here today for this conference on human rights and development. To those of you who are here with us in the room and to the numerous people who are following us online, I would like to thank you all to attend this conference. I would like to thank a few people first, and I would like also to share with you the aim of this conference. Let's start with the thanks. I would like to thank all of our speakers, some of them who traveled from afar, some of whom will be speaking remotely. I would like to thank all of our speakers for accepting our invitation and for fueling our discussions that we will be having today. I would like to thank most particularly our MC, Mr. Yakuba Kebe, who accepted to act as an MC and moderator for the various sessions. Thanks again. I would like also to thank the AFD colleagues who worked on the organization of this conference, and specifically Farid Lamara and Sarah Hayes, who were both the designers and organizers of this conference. They've been working relentlessly on this conference for the past month to bring us all together here today. I would also like to thank all of our colleagues and who will be participating in this conference in order to promote this conference, and thank you also to the technical support team. This conference is the first of this kind at AFD that is specifically dedicated to human rights and development. Various elements led us to organize it. I'm not going to give you a full list, but I would like to share a bit of context that we all know about. Numerous setbacks of fundamental rights for a number of years in many countries in the context of endemic conflicts and their implications, chronic humanitarian crisis, poverty and inequalities to rights that are increasing since the start of the pandemic, right to health and education, among others, and the threats in terms of climate change and loss of biodiversity, which is taking a toll on human rights, but also on non-human in many different territories. France, in this context, made major commitments by adopting a strategy with its Minister of Foreign Affairs and through the development policy in the act passed on the 4th of August. And this was also highlighted in the Africa Front Summit in Montpellier. That is why at AFD we thought that it was important to include this in our next strategic orientation plan and to bring together the community of development stakeholders from both the North and the South, Europe and the rest of the world, to open a space for a forum for dialogue and to exchange our views, international and multi-stakeholders, in order to feed our collective reflection on human rights-based approach and for the fulfillment of SDGs. So we are bringing together various kinds of participants, public institutions, civil society organizations, development banks, the private sector, among others, as well as academics. We want to open the discussion to the growing challenges, to the rights of nature and the right to a healthy environment. And we all know the significant implications of the current environmental crisis. We also want to dwell on the changing agenda of human rights and to question the new approaches to meet the challenges of our contemporary world. In particular, the questions of convergence for human rights-based approach and with the reduction of multidimensional inequalities, climate justice, the connection between human and non-human, collective rights, indigenous communities, communities and due diligence. These many subjects will be discussed today, but this is still not exhaustive in terms of a human rights agenda. But as I said, we hope to open a discussion today. We'd like to share together our analysis and our action opportunities. Without much further ado, I wish you a very fruitful discussion, and now I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Delphine Borione, the Ambassador for Human Rights. Thank you, Madam, for being here today and for accepting to open this conference. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor.
Chers amis, présents ou...
My dear friends,
Je suis très honorée.
I'm honored to be opening this conference organized by our operator, the Agence Française de Développement, or AFD. This is part of the development and human rights strategy adopted by France with its Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 73 years ago, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This led to the universal recognition of human rights without any kind of discrimination. Because the fight is not over, far from it, we need to keep mobilized when these rights are questioned everywhere in the world. And we need to be aware, humbly, of the action that remains to be done. And when we draw that balance, the situation is far from being satisfactory. It is actually quite gloomy. A constant rise in inequalities and conflicts, the rise in conservatism, all of this is threatening years of progress for the rights of women and girls. Civil society organizations find it difficult to operate. Human rights advocates are threatened, harassed, and very often submitted to direct attacks. The response to COVID-19 led to a deterioration of the situation in many countries. But we need to remain firm and we need to remain committed. France highlighted at various occasions that sustainable development and the SDGs and human rights are strongly intertwined. And this is directly related to the fundamental rights of all individuals as defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other legal instruments that are related to it. And I would like to quote the UN Secretary General. There can be no security without development. There can be no development without security. And there is no security and no development if we do not respect human rights. And we are here to abide by this vision. And we need to repeat it relentlessly to those who question development by questioning these inalienable and indivisible rights. Economic development is not a requisite for these rights to be expressed. They are a condition and not an obstacle to development and sustainable development. This is all part of a sustainable and inclusive development. France, along with its European partners, are particularly wary of these principles being questioned, including at the UN. 3 years ago, France was adopted its human rights and development strategy. This is meeting 3 objectives. First of all, this will be used as a leverage for the promotion of human rights. Secondly, putting human rights at the core of our actions for development as part of the European development consensus that was adopted by the EU in 2017. This strategy is also leading to a methodological orientation for the operational actions for development. It's a human rights-based approach that leads the implementation and design of these orientations by France. This highlights 3 objectives. Do not harm, associating beneficiaries to the design and implementation of programs, and bringing about as many possible positive impacts impact in terms of SDGs, so we can all reach sustainable development. This approach is based on the policies from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also its operators, including AFD. To reach these objectives, an ambitious plan was designed in order to facilitate the cross-cutting approach based on human rights for AFD. 4 priorities were defined. Education to human rights, in particular for children. To make sure that all beneficiaries of development projects are able to make their rights recognized. Second, education and support of development actors by supporting their action in human rights advocacy and development. Thirdly, the periodical review by the UN and similar organizations. And fourth priority, defending human rights activists. On the 4th of August 2021, the law on solidarity-based development and the fight against inequalities was passed with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This act is establishing the objectives and resources used by AFD, and it is promoting human rights, and with this law, France is restating the universality of human rights. It is stating once again gender equality, access to health, access to sexual and reproductive health, the fight against the death penalty, freedom of expression and information, freedom of religion and faith, and social and economic and cultural rights. This law restates the commitment of France in a world that is still characterized by the competition between major powers and the use of violence by authoritarian regimes and by the questioning of fundamental rights by too many countries. However, we should not be pessimistic or hopeless. We will continue our fight in favor of rights for development with our diplomatic teams that are mobilized every day in the field. We'll keep on cooperating with all of our operators, partners, civil society organizations. I would like to commend the role of NGOs and ground organizations that work closely with populations, and they are the spokespeople of our embassies worldwide, because it is by the synergy of all of the implicated actors that we can be efficient. We are also an elected member at the Council for Human Rights, and this shows the responsibility of France for the promotion of human rights internationally. We defend 3 main pillars: the fight against inequalities and the Forum Equality Generation showed our commitment to promote the rights of girls and women. Then fundamental liberties and the information space and media freedom is key. And we also support human rights advocates. And I'm happy to say that the President of the French Republic will strengthen this support through a partnership between the Ministry, AFD, and the Human Rights Platform. To conclude, there is no doubt that today's conference will be an engaging discussion to enable AFD to use even more efficiently the funds allocated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to implement the policies and resources that are put in place by the Ministry to serve this cause. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Yakuba Kebe, as I was introduced by the Director for Strategy. I'm from Mali, and I'm very happy to be with you today. After these very sensitive remarks, after this very strong speech, I would like to wish you all a very fruitful conference. And I would like to ask all of you, as a moderator, I would like to ask all of you to make sure that it is a cheerful and productive day. So, ladies and gentlemen, attending this conference here or remotely, dear guests, dear panelists, it is an honor for me to have crossed Sahara and the Mediterranean to attend this first conference on human rights and development by AFD. This topic is central, fundamental to me and to France, to the whole world. This topic is goes to show that there is a global balance that we still need to find. And when AFD asked me to moderate a part of the conference in Paris, while I was in Ségou, it's a city with a very long history in Mali. And if you want to understand this concept that is very important in Mali, well, I would like to give you the example of Maya, which is Ubuntu in the local language. And one of our ministers tried to translate it as manhood in French. And this is our unconditional contribution to others. And this vision of what we call Maya is I am because you are. And on that basis, concepts such as human dignity and international solidarity sound quite obvious. However, maybe this is obvious in Ségou, but it might not be so obvious in New Delhi, in Paris, or in any other city. How can we make sure that through our human rights-based approach we can reach SDGs by enabling all of the communities the right to pursue happiness? AFD, which celebrated its 80th anniversary, happy anniversary, by the way, knows that we need to bring our contributions together if we want to make progress. And our partners are now leading us to question the general concepts, specific contexts, all the new concepts that lead to the changes in the way we understand human rights and these indivisible, universal and inalienable rights. So from the various events and various human rights instruments, we know that human rights are not set in stone, whether it be in space or in time. And we need to work collectively on human rights in order to find the right balance. And this is what is at stake with this conference on human rights and development. Ladies and gentlemen, for this conference, which due to health restrictions is organized in part remotely, we will discuss a human rights-based approach. And through our discussions, we will discuss the challenges and opportunities for emerging countries and development stakeholders. We will discuss the role of states, of civil society organizations. We will discuss due diligence, among other themes. I would like to thank Mr. Farid Lamara, because I have to say that the face mask was bothering me a little. So if you'll allow me, I'm just going to remove it now.
Voilà, ça c'est fait.
Right, so it feels better now, and I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now. Thank you so much. So, as I was saying, for our opening session, after these two speeches, we will start by the video message from Michelle Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. From Chile, she managed to give back hope, to bring back hope to the world through her personal battles in the 1970s, since the 1970s. And I think that she will enable her to give us a general overview of the context. And I think that Mrs. Bachelet will manage to tell us more about this current context. And we are now going to watch her video message that was recorded.
Greetings to all of you, and my thanks to the Agence Française de Développement for putting together this important meeting. This is a time of escalating inequalities with dramatic setbacks to achievement of environmental commitments and the Sustainable Development Goals, accompanied by rising conflicts and severe social tensions. We badly need to forge strong new bonds between the full range of stakeholders in every region for action that is effective because it is based on shared and tested principles. Inequalities have fueled the pandemic, and in turn the pandemic is driving greater increases in inequalities. Over 100 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty. More than 2.3 billion people are living in conditions of food insecurity. And within this context of increasing suffering, women, low-income and informal workers, young people, and members of ethnic and religious minorities and indigenous peoples have been the hardest hit. In other words, the pandemic is creating even greater age, gender, and racial inequalities. I'm also particularly concerned about the pandemic's devastating impacts on children's rights. After school closures and economic recession, many of the poorest children may never return to education, which could perpetuate generational inequalities for years to come. Moreover, in another vicious cycle, the pandemic has been fueled by global economic divergence and is making those divergences worse. The most developed economies are forecast to grow in 2022, but the lowest income countries are projected to endure continued recession, pushing the people further behind. This divergence reflects dangerously unequal vaccine coverage. The Omicron variant highlights the concrete fallout of this vaccine inequity and shortfalls in social protections. In Europe, according to the IMF, at least 54 million jobs were supported between March and October 2020, keeping people and companies afloat. Overall, government-supported stimulus measures in high-income countries amounted to an average of 20% of GDP, while in low-income countries it was less than 2%. Debt is also sharply reducing many countries' ability to act. Globally, over half of least developed and low-income countries are in or approaching intense debt distress. Factors include unprecedented capital flight, plunging commodity prices, and decreased revenues from taxes, tourism, and remittances. We are already seeing that high debt service payments are crowding out investments in rights such as health, social protection, a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and education that are essential to sustainable recovery. A recent study indicates that social spending reductions are likely in 83 out of 189 countries by 2023, potentially affecting the human rights of 2.3 billion people. The impacts of the global environmental crisis amplify these inequalities, but we continue to witness actions to address climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss that are not sufficient to avert their devastating human rights consequences. They are also not always affected in a manner that respects human rights. Affected communities are often shut out of environmental decision-making processes where their voices are needed. Globally, 227 environmental human rights defenders were killed in 2020 alone, and many more face exclusion, harassment, and violence. Moreover, many states have imposed heavy restrictions on fundamental freedoms and the civic space during the pandemic period. All these deepening gaps do not only affect millions of individual lives, creating unnecessary injustice and suffering. They create grievances, tensions, and violence rocking entire societies. They impede development and undermine peace. In our global village, they are threats to the well-being of everyone. And they can be prevented. We need to change the economic approaches that have produced this unbearable social cost, tearing apart the fabric of our societies and amplifying mistrust towards institutions. We have seen that investing in rights, for example, health, education, and social protection, produces strong benefits for the economy and society. It is time to act on that knowledge. To recover from the biggest development setback in our lifetime, we need an economy that is people and planet-centered and which works for everyone. Human rights law, including gender equality, the right to health, education, and social protection, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, constitute a resilient and adaptable framework for more effective solutions. They guide us to expand fiscal space by taking action to stem corruption and by emphasizing more redistributive and socially fair taxation. They lead us to abandon chronic underfunding of essential services and prioritize universal health care, social protection, quality education, and other human rights. They lead us to new policies of transparency, accountability, justice, and dialogue that broaden the civic space, leading to more free and meaningful participation and unlocking public trust. This is not a job just for a state. The private sector, international finance institutions, and all other development actors are essential to advancing this more resilient and inclusive approach, which is intrinsic to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. For businesses, in line with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human rights due diligence all along the supply chain should be used to address risk generated by global challenges and shape relevant responses. I take this opportunity to acknowledge France's duty of vigilance law of the 24 March 2017 to date, the most far-reaching legislation to address the need for effective measures to prevent human rights risks throughout supply chains. I also want to emphasize the need for development banks to direct their financing to support for human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment with robust human rights impact assessment. In this context, I commend the Financing Common initiative headquartered by the Agence Française de Développement, which groups more than 500 development banks and other stakeholders in an effort to drive principled development projects. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has committed all UN bodies to advance our common agenda, a broad-based framework anchored in human rights that will advance human development and in renewed social contract, inequality, and inclusion. This is the way ahead, to a world that is more resilient, more fair, more respectful of rights, and more equal. Thank you very much.
Je veux remercier ici
Allow me to thank
Madame Bachelet pour cette intervention pleine d'enseignements.
Excellency Mrs. Bachelet for this paper with lots of lessons. And this is a very foresight comment about the world. It's time to act. So this is a heartfelt message. An appeal is being launched to the development banks so that we can have a fresh social contract, so that human rights are at the forefront of our approaches. Thank you, Mrs. Bachelet. And when I listen to her, I've understood that there's a global perspective that can be fed with continental regional perspectives and outlook. So today, on December the 10th, we are celebrating the human rights. So it means that there's a debate on how we can nurture this global perspective. The the EU has organized on the EU NGO Forum in order to establish some strong recommendations. How the EU can protect the civic space in a global world. And it's important to reinforce access to healthcare and access to decent work. So we are delighted to welcome today the interim head of governance, peace, security from the European Commission, Mrs. Chiara Adamo. She said 3 years ago that conflicts and threats will put democracy and the human rights to the test. So she will be delivering a speech to us, but I would like to invite her 3 years after how the EU intends to play a key role on these questions. Mrs. Chiara Adamo, thank you for accepting our invitation. Thanks a lot. I would like to thank AFD for this invitation. It's a pleasure. It's an honor for me to be with you today. It's a pleasure for me to be here in France. I do apologize to you. I prepared my speech in English, so maybe I will switch to English.
I'm sure we will have opportunities to exchange in French later on. So as it appeared from the intervention of Madame Bachelet, this year theme for Human Rights Day is reducing inequalities and advancing human rights. And indeed, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and this is the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you think of it, it's also the core of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And this really shows that what we need is a right-based global recovery to the COVID pandemic, and it shows that realizing human rights is an imperative for human dignity and is also very much a cornerstone for sustainable development. So through international partnerships, the European Union wants to project globally what we do stand for, what the European Union and its member states stand for. And we recognized early on in the pandemic the socioeconomic consequences, but also the human rights and democratic backsliding and threats, which actually is heightening, as we all say, pre-existing inequalities, and I think is important to again underline in it. But really is putting pressure on all of us, and is putting pressure on democracies. I'm not going to repeat the enormous global challenges we have on the right to education, health, and economic inequalities. I think our speaker did it marvelously. But what I wanted to add that all these challenges, all these challenges to socioeconomic, education, health rights put really a test to our democracies. Last year, for the first time in 10 years, according to international standards and indexes, we had more autocracies than democracies. And we have very similar trends in terms of the number of countries, which is exponentially growing, experiencing regressions in fundamental freedom, really basic freedom of expression, assembly and association. So what should we do? 3 points. The first is, of course, we need to respond through greater impact, focus and scale, helping partner countries and our civil society partners to cushion the impact of COVID. And we have the means at our disposal. Our new external budget of 60 billion euros for development only for the next 6 years, Global Europe, is there to leverage funding from public and private sources for health, for socioeconomic recovery. Yesterday, our President van der Leyen announced in anticipation to Human Rights Day, but also to leverage the EU standing at the Summit of Democracies, that we adopted a new bold thematic program on human rights and democracy. within the Global Europe program for 1.5 billion euros. And it really will be devoted to promoting the universality of human rights, promoting inclusive democracies, promoting freedom of press and protecting human rights defenders, a similar line that our ambassador just underlined, and it very much reflects the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy for 2020 and 2024, because of course programming and policies need to be fully aligned. On top of it, I was also glad to note that following discussions with partner countries around the world, 2/3 of them helped us to select as priority sector of intervention democratic governance at large, including access to justice, including rule of law, including fighting corruption, for geographic programs in the years to come. So we can do more, we have resources, but we will only fail if we don't do it together. And here it is a particular pleasure to be with you, because we did initiate a new approach, a Team Europe approach, with the start of the COVID pandemic, because we just simply realized that these global challenges are of such a scale that we cannot do anything on our own. We need to increase our impact, our coordination. I'm very grateful, for instance, to France for being part of our Team Europe initiative on democracy. And indeed, it's for EU institutions, EU development agencies, and also European development finance institutions to come together to face these challenges. The second point, you mentioned it, is ensuring an inclusive and participatory approach. We had a very successful forum, NGO forum, co-organized with the Human Rights and Democracy Network. Some of the organizations will be here today. You will hear from them. More than 700 participants. And the key message I take home is simply one: don't do anything about us without us. It can be banal, but that's really, I think, what I take back, and what we need to commit to do in a more systematic way, in a meaningful way. And we started to really do it, put it in operation with our delegations on the ground, making sure that everything we do, our actions are informed by involving civil society partners, broad range, women organizations, youth organizations. And the youth, you might be 30 years old, but I can tell you that are really those who are inspiring us for change. We will have a bold youth action plan for the external relations in 2022. So the third point and last point, because I'm getting very long, is that we need to ensure a recovery for all. It is again about making sure that we have a human rights-based approach to what we do. Think of indigenous people in the Amazon, the guardian of our climate, of our environment, and the increasing spike of harassment, discrimination, and killings of indigenous people, including women, indigenous community in the communities, and so forth. Think of, you mentioned the limitation to SRHR, the real difficulty for LGBTI people to access health in the context of the pandemic in particular. So we need to reduce these structural inequalities among people, and indeed the European Council for Development back in 2017 committed us politically, the European Union and its member states, to adopt human rights-based approaches to development cooperation. So I really salute the work of France in this respect. Just this year, the European Union renewed its human rights-based approach toolbox methodology in June. And importantly, it is now a legal obligation for us, because it was introduced in the Global Europe regulation, which is our basis for financial programs. So it is a compulsory requirement. The new toolbox really aims at providing for practical tools, examples from the ground for those who operate in different regions of the world, to really help them apply human rights-based approach throughout the programming cycle, throughout interventions, from design of a project to the evaluation of a project. As you know, it's based on 5 principles. It's respecting all rights, it's promoting inclusion and participation, is ensuring non-discrimination and equality, and also transparency and accountability. But this, which seems very abstract, is declined very, very practically. So I really invite you to go to our website, reach out to us, and we can also exchange on our different practices as we used to do with some of the colleagues here in Brussels. Very last point, intersectionality, which is a very important element of the new updated human rights-based approach to development. And it's also part and parcel of the new action plan on gender equality, GAP 3, which we also adopted recently, 1 year ago, that looks at addressing individuals in all their diversity. So really intersectionality is about addressing all forms of discrimination, looking at specific barriers that people in different situations face, and understanding the underlying causes and how they manifest. So I just wanted to underline the importance of that. And this translates, as I said, in our quality review process for projects and programs, alongside the human rights-based approach. So finally, we need to measure results, because it's very good we come here and tell you we adopted all these nice plans and laws, but how do we implement them? And in order to measure result, we need robust measurement indicators. So here I am particularly delighted that we really are working with AFD, and thanks to AFD, on an innovative new marker, an inequality marker, to better understand and track the impact of our work on inequalities. It should enable us to really identify and assess the extent to which objectives activities are designed to benefit the poorest bottom 40 individuals or households. So I think this last example, again, is an illustration of the need for us really to continue to work together as Team Europe to achieve progress in these challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madame. C'est une intervention claire. C'est une
A clear speech, deep-seated speech. The words were well chosen in order to highlight the importance and the need to assess the national and regional policies about protection of human rights. So over the past 2 years, the past 3 years, the EU has made strides, has implemented some initiatives. You've mentioned them, and we are very happy with those initiatives. But following your paper, I've noted that we need to work together. This is a strong approach. Of course, I mean, all the stakeholders should work together, and this is why we are here today. And you stressed the new directions, the new paradigm of the EU. And as part of this paradigm, there's a need to promote universality of rights and to promote freedom of the press. And I can tell you that this is something that is very dear to my heart. Human rights issue, it's an issue that we need to know better. We have some stakeholders who are dedicated to address this issue, this question. They want to know what works and what doesn't work. So today we have a speaker who has spent his or her life, to give information about the prison on behalf of Prison Insider. They help us to understand that prisons shouldn't be a place where fundamental rights are violated. So we have with us Mrs. Florence Laufer. You are the Vice President of the Human Rights Platform and a Prison Insider. So you have the floor. Thank you, Yakuba. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear participants who are not with us today. I'm honored to take part in this day. This is a unique day. So today I will speak as the Vice President of the Human Rights Platform, but I'm the head of Prison Insider. It's an information platform on prisons and jails in the world, and the assignment is to inform and to benchmark the conditions of prisoners. This is something that we tend to forget when we talk about inequalities, and this topic most of the time is sidelined. But of course, Prison Insider has an internet site available in French, English, and Spanish, documenting prisons and jails, and there's a menu that you can have a look at. So if you consider the Human Rights Platform, I'm the Vice President. It's a set of NGOs aiming at defending human rights. It was created in 2017, and the objective is to beef up collective dynamics and helping NGOs to work together across different topics, something that we talked about this morning. We have 26 members, and this platform is being bolstered. So if you consider the platform of human rights, it has been supported by AFD, and there's a phase 2 program, and we have some objectives to make sure that governance and modus operandi are materialized in the long haul. And of course, what is important is to focus on advocacy and diversity. The 26 members have embarked upon different actions, but I'm not going to list them all, but I will provide you with some actions. We're working on civil and political rights, combating the death penalty, combating torture and slavery, to promote the rights of people, the rights of people who are detained, migration, asylum, sports, and to name but a few. As part of the partnership between AFD and our association, there are mutual interests. There are some practical initiatives that are co-designed. It's a spirit of cooperation. There's a training program that was implemented by Human Dignity, and the objective is to organize training modules on the development of human rights, and it is very useful for the AFD team. And we can also mention the design of a support project for those who protect and defend human rights. Of course, when we are united, we are stronger. That's true. But what is important is the complementarity approach, a complementary approach amongst all these stakeholders. It's a matter of being united, even though we are diverse. And this is something that we've witnessed. So we have some members who are advocacy. People are working on human rights and development, and other people are working only on human rights. Others are working on field action, and others devote their work to public training. So we are committed to human rights, and that's why we have lots of dimensions that we can tap. We have a universal agenda, both for the North and the South. So there is no such thing as unilateralism of work. So different members of our platform have a governance system beyond the borders for La Page, IFEDH. So it means that we can exchange our views, and there's a learning process, there's a learning curve. So it means that we can challenge our beliefs, so we can make strides. And what is important is to make sure that all actions are intertwined. So this is diversity at work, but it is complex. It changes quite a lot. So we have to come up with some inclusive work. So inclusiveness means that we need to pay attention to internal democracy. And of course, we need to think about the way we work and the language of work. When I talk about languages, I have in mind French, English, Spanish. Languages are a tool to enable us to conduct our policies, but you need to think about the language of advocacy democracy, the language of citizens' information. And there's a risk all the time because there are some misunderstandings, and misunderstandings might divide us. And we might be under the impression that we don't work on the same objective, but we have a common agenda, we have common objectives, the challenges are huge, and of course, we need to be strong. That's why we have a plurality of stakeholders. I think that today's agenda will enable us to dive into the projects, to elaborate on the projects. So I'd like to thank you and have a nice day.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. Je me souviens que dans votre...
Thank you, Madam. So, as part of your background, I mean, you talked about geographical diversity, cultural diversity. Africa, if you consider the cultures of Africa, Africa didn't know prisons. So, if there were no prisons in the past, today we can make wishes. We wish that prisons and jails could vanish into thin air. So it would mean that we could live in a climate of peace. So I'm delighted to welcome the next speaker. I'm happy because I will be able to talk about gender. So for this session, so far we have listened to women. So I think that we'll be able to balance the discussions and conversations. And of course, I'm delighted to welcome the next speaker, the Nobel Peace Prize of 2015 from Tunisia. So, of course, you can't see him, but he's smiling because he's wearing a mask. But he will remove his mask, and he has fought quite a lot for international solidarity. Mr. Ahmed Galai, and a big round of applause to him.
Sabah al-Nour. Bonjour, chers amis.
So, good morning, dear friends. Thank you, Yakuba, for moderating this debate. And let us talk about human rights, Al-Shania. So if you consider AFD conference, humanities is at the center of development. It's a good start. So dear friends, Ms. Director, head of the AFD officers, those who are instrumental in this conference, dear participants, dear guests, good morning. I'm an activist in human rights. I'm a universalist. So it's a great honor for me, and it's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm very happy to be with you today, and I'm at the core of this intertwined issue of development and human rights. And of course, there are lots of stakeholders from all walks of life, international agencies, governments, human rights activists. So the topic of development will be fulfilled if it is participative and if it implies the participation and discussions of all people. So this topic has been chosen in a very relevant fashion. You've talked about the global context. The global context is being hampered by the social crisis, by wars, by the pandemic. So it is as though the Uyghur bull is tired. In fact, the earth is on two horns, and then the bull is tired. The bull will lose its horns. So I think that we need to work together. For example, we have a tortoise that could turn brownish because the water is polluted. So, using these metaphors to highlight the challenges. So, human rights have been curtailed. Social, political, cultural rights have dwindled. These rights that are enshrined in the International Charter. So, these human rights are undermined. and it's a disquieting trend. So we've noticed that human rights have been undermined because of a crisis, because of poverty, because of malnutrition, water shortages, health, education. So it's very difficult for people to fulfill all their rights. So if you consider the global reports, the reports of many agencies, the report of the UNDP, they've sounded the alarm bell. There are some inequalities between developed countries and developing countries. And within these countries, these inequalities are gaping. And I will give you a painful example. So 2 children who were born, one in a developed country, the other in a developing country. 20 years after, the first one will be educated, will go to higher education. But for the other child who is 20 in a developing country, he might die before reaching 20, because most of these children die before reaching 20. So this underlines this humanitarian crisis. It's a paradoxical situation. So with modernity, there are some paradoxes. So the 500 richest people have an income that is higher than the 416 million poor people. 600 million people are living in utter poverty. 262 million children are out of school. So you can understand the future for them. Even though there is a will. So there are some imbalances between the North and the South. So you have social and economic inequalities, but in addition to that, you have changes that are brought about by climate change. So people are moving, and people are increasingly poor. So the pandemic has had some impact on the marginalized people. Some people were forced to leave. There are despotic authoritarian regimes using populist messages, and this is a threat to democracy, to social bonds, and to human rights. So if you have a look at these inequalities, if you have a look at these violations, they are compounded. And this hurts our human dignity. It's a blatant denial of human rights in their universality, indivisibility. So if the Sustainable Development Goals are not reached, it's because they are not connected with what is happening. So they are disconnected with human rights. There's so inequalities are on the increase, and development has been hampered. Wild neoliberalism that is promoted by the international stakeholders with some structural adjustment plans, and there are some binding clauses, but they don't care about the destructive social costs. This is something that we witnessed in Tunisia. With the shortage of bread, there are some social upheavals. And from time to time, there's an attempt to development, but it is poorly managed. You have to continue to fight, and we've noticed that public debt has increased. Public debt is 81.5% of GDP. So I can tell you that it's a burden for Tunisia, but a burden for other countries. I mean, public debt is very high in many poor countries. Hence, some riots. There are some riots in Senegal. In other countries, there were lots of riots because of different shortages and because of the structural adjustment plans. And human rights have been undermined. So we need to break that circle. We need to break with this approach that is based on technical and economic matters, especially when you consider development. So development should be about humanistic values, and that's why I'm delighted to be with you, AFD, with the EU and with EU associations, have decided to come up with an approach based on human rights. So development and human rights would make it possible to ensure balanced growth and maintain peace and security. There's a strong link between peace, security, and human rights, and everybody should be in a position to fulfill their rights. So all people, men and women, could exercise and should exercise their rights. Have in mind the Human Rights Declaration, have in mind the IDPH, have in mind the different covenants and conventions about women, conventions on torture. So there should be a human bedrock. A bedrock that is represented by many conventions that have been signed by many countries, but we are yet to witness the tangible progress. So AFD has beefed up an approach based on human rights, and development is a human right. This is a new concept, and I think that it was forged by a young Senegalese citizen, Yacouba. You are from Mali, but Africa is very diverse.
Donc le droit au développement, c'est un...
So the right to development is a human right.
Et comme l'a stipulé aussi la déclaration de 86.
And in the 1986 declaration, which is unfortunately non-binding, well, it's a beautiful declaration on development and the connection between human rights and development, which was adopted in December 1986. This goes to show that there is that it's not a convention, it's a declaration, and therefore it's non-binding. And I would like to see a binding convention so that countries can assume their triple responsibility to recognize rights, protect them, and implement them. So yes, the right to development is a human right. Because if development has as an objective a decent life for all, it covers the legitimate right of everyone to get a share of global economic development. And it is not just the addition of the rights in the Charter. It is actually a synthesis of all of those rights because it is strengthened and brings more value to these rights. So this is what was stated in the 1986 declaration. Ladies and gentlemen, as you rightfully stated, the human rights are inalienable, and all men and women are allowed to contribute to development. This approach is meant to address the root causes of poverty, inequalities, and conflicts. It aims at progress, including everyone, to make sure that everyone and all peoples can live in freedom and dignity. Development as a human right is strongly related to the right to self-determination, the right for people to have self-sovereignty. And it grants the right to indigenous people to be involved in development and to ensure economic recovery while abiding by human rights global standards. All stakeholders, and this is actually one of the strengths of your conference, all stakeholders, all development players should join forces for consultation and for action to make sure that we really place human rights at the core of our action. So we have now reached the stage of Homo humanitus after Homo sapiens, and we all need to benefit from this. And everyone is entitled, collectively or individually, to bear the profit of this. And we need to make sure that women are included in all of these development actions. Public authorities need to fulfill their obligations in enabling everyone to have access to economic and social rights. And they need to make sure that there is equality in opportunities in access to health, education, food, housing, decent jobs, and the equitable distribution of revenue. We are all in favor of a non-discriminatory and inclusive development. And as for peace, there's a saying that says that there's no path for human rights. Human rights are the path. And we usually say there is no path for peace. Peace is the path. And to conclude, I would like to say a famous quote of Cassius in Caesar. The fleet is not ours.
La faute n'en est pas à nos étoiles.
The fleet does not belong to the stars, it belongs to ourselves. It is therefore down to us, civil society actors, government actors, population, civil society. So it is down to us all to make this world a better place. And it is possible. Another world is possible. Thank you.
Un autre monde est possible. Quoi dire de plus?
Another world is possible. What else can I add after this brilliant speech?
Cette intervention portée
this
par M. Galai.
Speech by Mr. Galai.
Combat dont j'ai parlé tout à l'heure.
And this was stated by Mr. Galai in his many fights that I mentioned before.
D'ouverture.
And
justement de lancer.
This is the best transition into our first session. But first of all, I would like to try and summarize what has already been said. I would like to summarize this in just one word. It is commitment. I think that this is the word that I've heard the most, commitment. Commitment as a common denominator.
Et faire face à ces enjeux.
To face these challenges, commitment as a wonderful driver
des défis des droits humains
to face all of these challenges, and commitment as an individual promise, as you explained, Mr. Galai, because it is our duty for all of us, because we are all aiming at a society that respects human rights and fundamental rights. So we are going to have a first plenary session